Now on BBC World News, the biggest African and international news stories. Focus on Africa.
Hello, this is Focus on Africa, and I'm Lukwesa, Burak. Our top stories today: from economic powerhouse to a country straining under the financial burden of war, and all in the space of just 12 months. Sanctions, suspension from a lucrative trade deal, and thousands of job losses loom for Ethiopia if the US carries out its threats.
If this factory is to be closed, I will have to return to being a stay-at-home mom. If it wasn't for this, I sometimes ask myself, what would happen to all of these young women?
A Kenyan court finds 4 police officers guilty of manslaughter in the case of a British national who died in custody in 2012. Also in the programme, so was it a cop-out? As Glasgow bid farewell to the world this weekend, the hard work really begins in the battle to find solutions to fight climate change. But has Africa been phased out yet again? Well, small island states are not pleased with the outcome. We hear from Mauritius.
And after COP26 with this new deal, we're heading to a 2.4 world, which is still very far from 1.5. So no, I'm not really happy with the deal.
Hello and welcome to Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. Well, it's 1 year into the conflict now in Ethiopia, and the crisis shows no sign of easing. Thousands of people have been killed, 2 million displaced. The economic cost of the conflict is also mounting. Now, for a country once hailed as Africa's growth engine, in 2019, it was actually the continent's fastest growing economy. That's according to the World Economic Forum. Well, its fortunes have now plummeted. Inflation is soaring. Food and fuel prices are on the up, and international pressure is increasing. The United States has warned that it could impose sanctions on the federal government and the rebels in the Tigray province. And earlier this month, the US again citing gross human rights violations, announcing that it planned to suspend Ethiopia from a very lucrative trade agreement known as the AGOA, which allows local manufacturers duty-free access to its markets. So, as the BBC's Kalkodan Yibeltown now reports, that move could further undermine Ethiopia's economy.
For about a decade, Ethiopia boasted one of the fastest growing economies across Africa. But a year of a bloody war which started in the Tigray region in the north and has since spread south is draining resources and slowing growth. Deteriorating security and the unpredictability of the war has prompted IMF to withhold its forecasts for the country. And as the international community continues to put pressure on Ethiopia, including threatening sanctions, many fear things could get even worse. This fear is especially felt in the southern city of Hawassa, which is hoping to become a textile manufacturing hub thanks to the trade benefits of the US African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, which allows tariff-free access to manufacturers as long as some criteria are met, such as eliminating barriers to the US trade and investment and increasing political pluralism. One of the earliest beneficiaries of the deal was Epic Apparels, a subsidiary of the Hong Kong-based Epic Group. But with US President Joe Biden's administration announcing its plan to remove Ethiopia at the beginning of next year from this agreement, the company that exports all its products to the US is fearful about the future.
We started business in Ethiopia with the sole incentive of this country or the sub-African countries having the benefit of duty-free access to the US. So we are definitely concerned. If AGOA is no longer existing, we would have to move out to another country. It would no longer be beneficial for us to, survive in Ethiopia.
Burak is one of the 2,000 employees in the factory, a mother of 2 who has supported her family for the past 4 years with the income she gets here.
If this factory is to be closed, I will have to return to being a stay-at-home mom. If it wasn't for this, I sometimes ask myself, what would happen to all of these young women? All of these people would have to return to their mothers and fathers. They would have to be a burden again for their mothers and fathers.
This industrial park houses more than a dozen similar factories that sells in the US market. Ethiopia has been the 5th top exporter under the deal and called the decision dismaying and asked the US to reconsider it. AGOA generates more than $100 million for the Ethiopian economy every year and directly creates work for 100,000 people, mostly for women in textile factories. As the war continues to rage with rebel forces advancing, many here hope that a peaceful settlement is still possible and that their jobs and livelihoods can still be saved. Kalkidan Ibeltal, BBC News, Hawassa.
Well, as that conflict in Ethiopia continues, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is due to arrive in Kenya on his first tour of the African continent, which will also include Nigeria and Senegal. Well, Mr. Blinken will kick off his talks with his host, President Uhuru Kenyatta, who's recently returned from Ethiopia himself, where he met with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The meeting in Nairobi will also address security issues in Sudan and Somalia. Now, the television network Al Jazeera says Sudanese security forces have arrested its bureau chief in Khartoum after raiding his home on Sunday. The Qatari-based company did not provide any further details. On Saturday, at least 5 people were killed during demonstrations against the military takeover in Khartoum and other cities. Now, 4 Kenyan police officers have been found guilty of manslaughter in the case of a British man who died in police custody almost 10 years ago. The 4 will serve between 5 to 10 years in prison. Mercy Juma has more from outside the court in Mombasa.
The family of Alexander Monson has waited 9 years to hear the court give a verdict against the 4 police officers who are accused of the death of their son. The 4 officers have been on trial for murder, but today they were charged with manslaughter.
All the accused persons deserve to be jailed to a custodial sentence. That is the only way a clear message will be sent out to the public and especially the police.
The judge said he can confirm that Alexander died within the compound of the police station, but he cannot ascertain who brutally tortured the 28-year-old to death because of the code of silence within the police force that has made the 4 accused not to mention any other persons who may have tortured Alexander. Outside the court, Alexander's mother and father expressed their disappointment about the verdict.
I cannot disagree with the judge. He's the law expert. So, but as a mother, it seems a poor exchange for 10 years of arduous work. We're about to have a 5-year sentence.
I'm not sure about the verdict. I think it could have been stronger. I mean, I'm happy with the result that they're going to go to jail and they're not going to have a very nice time there. They're not staying in a 5-star hotel, you know.
Alexander was initially arrested for smoking cannabis, and police initially claimed that he died from an overdose, but an inquest in 2018 said the 28-year-old died from trauma caused by a blunt object on the head. Human rights organizations have documented hundreds of cases of police brutality and extrajudicial killings in Kenya, but very few of these cases are investigated and concluded. Mercy Juma, BBC News, Mombasa.
Yesterday was World Diabetes Day, and it's all in the aim of raising awareness of a disease which affects millions of people around the world and counting. Now, type 2 is the most common form of diabetes. The body doesn't produce enough insulin, or it can't use the insulin it does produce to control excessive blood sugar levels, and it can be fatal. However, type 2 is also known as a lifestyle disease, so it's down to you, which means there is hope. Munge Wachira is from Kenya and is one person who's grasped that lifeline to make some serious changes in order to save his life. The BBC's Pauline Odiambo went to meet him.
45-year-old Munge Wachira has lived with type 2 diabetes for nearly 20 years. But the prevailing COVID-19 pandemic has made him more concerned about his condition.
When the pandemic started, one of my greatest fears is that people who have pre-existing conditions like diabetes or hypertension were more prone to more severe COVID attacks. So at that point in time, of course, there was a feeling of fear that drove me and said, I have to be healthy. I have to be on an upward trajectory in terms of the weight loss and maintain the weight loss, and also ensure that my sugars are very, very well controlled.
I met with Munge's doctor, a specialist in diabetes treatment, to find out more about the impact of COVID-19 among people with type 2 diabetes.
The fact that you have diabetes, and for this matter, type 2 diabetes, doesn't mean that you are more predisposed or you have a higher chance of getting COVID. The problem comes in when you get COVID and your diabetes is not well controlled.
Diabetes is a chronic disease that occurs when the pancreas does not produce enough insulin or when the body cannot effectively use the insulin it produces. Insulin is the hormone that regulates blood sugar, and irregular blood sugar can cause blindness, kidney failure, heart attack, stroke, and lower limb amputation. There are different types of diabetes, but according to the World Health Organization, over 90% of people with diabetes worldwide have type 2. Which, as in Munge's case, is often caused by excess body weight and lack of exercise. Currently, about 16 million Africans have diabetes, a worrying statistic, as the continent faces a 153% rise in type 2 diabetes over the next 20 years. Some experts, however, believe that a low-carbohydrate diet can help reverse type 2 diabetes.
But ketogenic diet is a very powerful tool towards reversal of type 2 diabetes. The only issue with a ketogenic diet is the way people do it. Scientifically speaking, if you do it correctly, then you will see a very good percentage of people reversing type 2 diabetes with ketogenic diet.
I have been off medication now for 1.5 years. There was an assessment of my blood sugars. There's something called glycated hemoglobin that checks in the last 3 months how well their sugars or how poorly their sugars have been performing, and the doctor is able to determine whether you can actually get off medication and use diet and exercise alone to manage the condition.
In addition to observing a strict diet, Munge often walks several kilometers in a day to help ease his pandemic-related anxieties.
Right now I feel good. Even I can say my mental health is much better. You know, I just feel like a much more wholesome person than I was before.
Paulino Diambo, BBC News.
We are going to be speaking to Peter Okwoche after the break as he rides back to the future in an all-electric tuk-tuk. He's back from Glasgow, fully charged, I might say, to talk us through the winners and losers of COP26. Stay with us.
Having a global perspective creates a deeper understanding.
Because in our connected world, all news is international.
And to answer your direct question, we have a deal.
So, for in-depth analysis
of the biggest stories from the US and around the world. And here is another army ambulance bringing in more COVID victims.
Join our team
and find out what is really going on.
BBC World News America.
Buya was a hell.
Behind every headline,
I had this feeling that I'm entering a prison.
there is a human story.
This
is Our World.
I just seen the cops kill somebody.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
If I'm in jail, I'm living my life meaningfully.
Our World, this weekend on BBC World News.
Human activities are responsible for climate change.
The worst flooding in a century.
A trillion-ton iceberg broken off Antarctica.
Forest fires in the Siberian Arctic.
Countries have committed to net zero.
Copenhagen has become the world's first carbon-neutral city.
Come with us to 2045 as we imagine a net zero world and how we did it. Memories of the Future on BBC World News.
Welcome back. Now, the United Nations Climate Summit in Glasgow is over. Thousands attended, lots of meetings, and finally, a deal was reached whereby countries promised to work on a path, as they described it, to curb their emissions targets, to limit the rise in average temperatures to that magic number, that 1.5 degrees Celsius, and minimise the effects of climate change. But many countries in Africa are angry. They're saying this is all another empty promise. So, are they right? Well, the BBC's Pierre-Antoine Denis, who attended the conference, looks back at what, if anything, was achieved.
That our climate commitment is action, not words.
This is immoral and it is unjust.
We say no more blah, blah, blah.
During 2 weeks, we have seen a lot of statements at COP26, but did we see any action? The UN conference, for the first time, explicitly called to reduce coal, the worst fossil fuel for greenhouse gases. But the pledges still don't go far enough to reduce greenhouse emissions to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. So, for the African continent, the deal was to come to COP26 with a wide agenda and settle for two key points: finance and adaptation. The $100 billion for adaptation promised each year by 2020 have been pushed by 3 years. For context, in 2019, $79 billion were mobilized. A quarter of it was for Africa. This is the give and take COPs are all about. Meanwhile, South Africa, the continent's biggest polluter, received $8.5 billion to solve its energy crisis and move away from coal. But there is still no structure around loss and damage from climate change-provoked disasters. Humanitarian aid would prevail instead. Why? The legal impact. Such a mechanism will bring with it the idea of climate justice, meaning that industrialized nations will become potentially liable for the damage caused around the world. So whether or not COP26 is a success is still in doubt. It brought up a common sense of urgency, but still left many people afraid that things are moving too slowly.
That was Pierre-Antoine Denis. Well, Peter Okocha, here he is, he's back. You saw him recently, about all the last 2 weeks in Glasgow. It's nice to see you back, Peter. Just tell us, what was it like?
It was immense. It was... It just went on and on and on and on. I mean, there were so many people. We were told that, on that first day, there were 25,000 registered delegates. Now, if you add on to that the people who weren't registered but were milling around the venue, there were 25,000, probably 30,000 people there. So it was quite intense, a lot of people to talk to, a lot of information to try and go through and really understand, because some of the nuances in the languages, it just kept changing and changing and changing until we just got this final document on Saturday.
Well, I mean, I know that you've been looking through it. A lot of African countries, businesses, leaders have been looking through it. Do you think that they feel that Africa got what they wanted? Did they get a good deal, basically?
I think if you ask African governments, the quick answer would be no. But it's a bit more complicated than that. If you look at South Africa, for instance, South Africa reached a deal that would help it begin the process of reducing its use of coal. South Africa, of course, we know, very dependent on coal. And they will be given about $8.5 billion for that. Now, for the other African countries, they were supposed to be receiving part of this $100 billion agreement that had been reached as far back as Copenhagen in 2012. Till now, that money hasn't been disseminated. They've not received that money, and no one quite knows when the money is going to come. Now, they're saying that they actually need more. They need up to $3 trillion. So if you don't get $100 billion, where's $3 trillion going to come from? I spoke to a Ghanaian environmentalist, a very experienced one, who's attended 25 of the 26 COP meetings. And he says, listen, Glasgow was the most complicated one. It was the most difficult one. But I did ask him, if the money is not put on the table, would this conference have been a success for Africa? Let's have a listen.
It wouldn't be. We need to get an indication of when we will get the money, how much we would get to address both adaptation and mitigation. Most African countries have submitted their nationally determined contribution, their own nationally determined efforts to address climate change, both in the area of adaptation and mitigation. We need the resources to implement it now. In my own country, Ghana, we've devised a 34 mitigation project and 13 adaptation projects, which requires over $60 billion to implement these. And across 44 African countries have so far submitted their own actions. Where is the money coming from? How much we're going to get? This is what we have to decide now.
Why is there no answer to this question? Why can't this funding be provided?
Developed countries promised us in Copenhagen 9 years ago, 2012, that they will provide between 2012 and 2020 about $100 billion annually. To date, that target has not been reached. Now we want to have another 4-year period between now and 2025 to be able to come up with that $100 billion annually to support climate action. That roadmap, how it will be raised. Now I think maybe, if I'm not mistaken, we're raising about $80 billion annually.
83 billion, yes.
So we're short of $20 billion. And we need to get that money to support all the actions we have put forward. And developing countries, and Africa in particular, want to act. We all want to play our part. Although I would say that Africa emits only 3% of global emissions, with 70% of global population. We still want to do our part.
That's Dr. George Manful, a Ghanaian environmentalist. Now, low-lying island nations such as Cape Verde and Mauritius, are most at risk from climate change. My colleague Nora Fakim has been speaking to an environmentalist in Mauritius, Rana, and asked her what she made of this deal.
The deal that was coming out of COP26 was supposed to keep the 1.5 alive, and this goal, as you know, is so important for countries like Mauritius and other small island states. So before COP26, we were heading to a 2.7 degrees Celsius world, and after COP26 with this new deal, we're heading to a 2.4 world, which is still very far from 1.5. So no, I'm not really happy with the deal.
In general, what did you make of COP26?
The biggest disappointment for me out of COP26 was not to see the funding that is supposed to be given for loss and damage. And this was taken out at the last minute, despite, lots of protests and negotiations.
India's Prime Minister and the British Prime Minister launched the Initiative for the Resilient Island States, in which Mauritius is part of. Do you feel a bit more optimistic that there are efforts being made when it comes to fighting climate change here in the country?
Efforts are definitely being made, but these efforts, in terms of being tangible, is what I'm worried about. When it comes to this announcement by the Prime Minister of India, together with the UK government, it has to do more with knowledge transfer and less on funding. And what is really needed when we talk about resilience of small island states is funding.
Egypt will be hosting COP27. What do you make of that?
Well, it's really great that the summit is going to come back to Africa. And when a country hosts a summit as important as the UN Climate Summit, there are two things that happen. First, the voices of that region get better heard, because in the next summit, the focus is going to be on resilience and adaptation, which are key priorities for Africa. There will be some scrutiny on human rights issues.
And Peter, I suppose the focus is also going to be on solutions now. I mean, you must have seen some interesting stuff up there. Give us a little feel.
Oh, a lot of countries had their pavilions there showcasing what they were doing about renewable energy. But I met this guy at St. George's Square, outside the venue, in the middle of Glasgow, a guy with an electric tuk-tuk. And Lukwesa, you and I both know that tuk-tuks are quite common and daily forms of transportation on the continent. And this one was electrified, and he said this is the way forward.
Wow. So this is a tuk-tuk. There is millions and millions of tuk-tuks across the southern regions, and they're all little petrol vehicles. They're the life and blood of the economy. There's got to be a transition to electrification. We need a smaller type of vehicle. Big cars need to be a thing of the past.
Just tell me a little bit about what's been written on it.
We've got messages written on here by delegates of COP, by business people, by campaigners, all sorts of different people have taken out the pen and put their messages all over the ZB.
And just to say that I've written my own piece right here. It says Mother Earth with a little signature there.
I love that tuk-tuk, honestly. But, you know, countries now have up until the end of next year to, you know, say how quickly they're going to start reducing their use of fossil fuels. But I guess all eyes now are on Egypt, that are, you know, the holiday resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, which is hosting the next COP. So COP27, too many COPs.
You know you're booked for that, don't you? And by the way, how much was that tuk-tuk now you put your signature on it? Priceless, Peter, that's the answer, priceless.
Gosh, you're too kind.
Anyway, that is it from the programme, from Peter and myself. You can find us both on social media. I'm at Lukwesa Burak, and Peter can be found at... At a Koche, yeah. From all of us here at BBC Focus on Africa, a very good evening to you. And don't forget, all the stories and plenty more can be found on the website. Just head to bbc.com. Again, bye-bye.